Well, hello, Convention of State supporters. My name is Andrew Woodruff. I will be your host for this episode of COS Live. And returning is now Rita Peters. She is a newlywed, no longer Rita Dunaway. So we are so thankful that you are back. And congratulations on getting married, Rita. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a great week, but I missed being with you last week, so I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, I missed having you as well. You are my partner in crime in these endeavors for
Yep.
liberty. So I'm so thankful that you're back. And we just have an amazing program for our audience today. One of the things that's really sticking in my mind is Congress, are they going to try and attempt to create every election and make it just like the 2020 election that we experienced? We are going to have our constitutional attorney, Rita Peters, give her analysis on HR 1. So we'll get to that in just a few moments. We also have an exclusive interview with Julie Baker, who is the grassroots coordinator for in Convention of States, Wyoming. And of course, we have our Article 5 trivia giveaway with COS Vice President Mike Ruthenberg. Mike, take it away.
Well, hello, Andrew and Rita. So glad to be here. This is Mike Ruthenberg, and it is time to do our trivia question. What an amazing time it is. And the first thing I have to say is the numbers of people that are seeing our Facebook Live is blossoming alongside with the number of people that are coming as volunteers and activists with the Convention of States Project. And one of the reasons for that is really going to be the core of our trivia question today, which talks about limiting the power of the federal government, which seems to be just swelling out of control right now. In the meantime, what I want to do is I want to show you what it is that you're going to get if you get the question right. You're going to get the We the People Decide t-shirt. This one happens to be extra large. And it's time to use the Constitution to save the Constitution, which is so true. That's what Article 5 is all about. And we're going to give away this shirt to the winner of our trivia question today. And of course, we're right in the middle, I should say, of our legislative season. There's a lot of things happening. We are really looking forward to seeing some new states join our 15 that currently have passed this resolution to take back the federal government. So here's the question for you today. So you might want to get your fingers real close to that keyboard so you can type in the answer if you know it. In either case, I certainly hope that you are keeping up on the conversation that's happening alongside of the main event, which of course is going to be our Wyoming grassroots coordinator today, which will be really exciting to see that things are happening in the great state of Wyoming, our least populated state in the nation, but equally as important, as you know. As the Declaration, so here's the background to our trivia question. The Declaration of Independence is really, the primary purpose of it is to protect or secure certain unalienable rights that we have as God's children. And what the Constitution does, of course, is puts checks and balances to the size of the federal government in order to protect our rights to freedom and self-determination. There's one method that limits that's a check by us, we the people, and or the states against the federal government. And it's, of course, Article 5. We just saw it on the t-shirt. We can use the Constitution, specifically the second provision of Article 5, to save the Constitution. And that's what we're in the middle of doing right now. However, there's one other way that can be used to limit the federal government that allows the states to do it, except it was repealed. And if you could tell us what that other way was repealed from our Constitution, that is our question for the day. So go ahead and think about that for a second. What right did we have as states to be able to control what happens with our federal government. That is no longer the case. Thank you to something that happened in the federal government, in the Constitution. I'll be back later to share the answer to that. If you're really confused, then that's okay. Because when we give you the answer, you'll understand an interesting change to the Constitution. Here's another hint. Happened way back in 1913 that really did change the balance of power in America. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Andrew and Rita. Have a great show, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the end of the show.
The federal government's playbook it's pretty simple. Find a crisis, claim that the states don't have the ability to solve the crisis, and then pass legislation that effectively takes away the state's ability to address the crisis, and then they just usurp that power and they try and solve the crisis. And the federal government, they use this playbook, or they abide by this rule in the playbook time and time again. And it reminds me of like what Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, the federal government has never missed an opportunity to jump at a crisis. Take COVID or the new HR 1 bill that was passed within the House. And the mainstream media has, of course, dubbed it the voting rights bill. But rest assured, all of this is a federal government takeover of state election laws, coast to coast. Now, Rita, I am not a constitutional scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that you certainly have a much deeper understanding of these constitutional questions. Would you be able to explain to the viewers why this bill is so terrible and what exactly it does?
Sure, I'm happy to take a stab at it. And I'll start by repeating what Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said. He said, and I quote, "If you liked how the last election was run, you're going to love HR 1. It's got all of election 2020's greatest hits, nationalized, federally funded, and designed to keep Democrats permanently in power," end quote. So I'll just go through sort of a list of what we're looking at here. It would create a baseline set of federal requirements for how states across the country administer elections. How's that for federalism? It would mandate that states automatically register all eligible citizens to vote. It would require same-day voter registration to be offered to all eligible voters, allow voters to meet any state's voter identification requirements with just a sworn written statement signed under penalty of perjury. It would establish Election Day as a national holiday, implement no excuse needed absentee voting, require 15 days of early voting at a minimum. It would restrict the reasons states could remove a name from its voter rolls, restore the franchise to all incarcerated individuals who've been released from jail, and require states to create independent redistricting commissions to redraw congressional districts as necessary. So in other words, rather than maintaining our federal system and allowing the states to control voting requirements for their own residents, HR 1 would transfer all of that decision-making power to the bureaucrats in Washington. Mm-hmm. Representative John Joyce said, "This scheme would mandate a federal takeover of elections, centralize election administration in Washington, D.C., and make permanent, universal, pandemic-style mail-in voting that undermines trust in our elections." Now, this legislation has already passed the House. If the Senate follows suit, Washington will just assert complete control over yet another area of American life. We need to build those constitutional firewalls to protect the American people against this kind of federal overreach moving forward. And Article 5 is our most powerful tool for doing that, because Article 5 of the Convention of States, Article 5 of the Constitution, as you know, Andrew, allows the states to call a convention for proposing amendments. And at this convention of states, the states have the power to propose constitutional amendments that limit the power, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government to prevent and preclude federal takeovers like this. These kinds of amendments can shore up the true federal system that our founders envisioned and created in the Constitution. And these amendments can also overturn the Supreme Court decisions by an activist court that have allowed the federal government to have this kind of total control over our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to read more about Article 5 and Convention of States, go to our website. Go to www.conventionofstates.com. Get in the know on all of the things related to what Rita was just talking about. There you'll find plenty of articles that outline the efficacy of Convention of States and why it is so essential for us to call the very first Article 5 Convention of States. As you probably know, this is the only safe, legal, effective, and peaceful way to rein in the federal government. As Pete Hegseth has said so many times, a convention of states would be a revolution without the bullets. So this would be a peaceful way to reclaim your self-governance, which the federal government is taking away every single day. They are trying to take more and more of your self-governance away, like with this HR 1 bill. So join the 5 million Americans who have voiced their support for Convention of States and go to the Convention of States website to sign the petition if you have not already done so. Make sure that you join this movement to reclaim your self-governance. Now, we have a special interview with Julie Chapman Baker, who is a grassroots coordinator in Wyoming, and she has the scoop on what's going on there right now. Julie, thank you for joining us. So I want to jump right into this. Jump right into this and just get the scoop of what went down in Wyoming last week, particularly on Wednesday and Friday.
Well, on Wednesday, we had a really good turnout of supporters to come to the Minerals Committee, Senate Minerals Committee, for our committee hearing. And we had about 50 supporters come, which is one of the legislators told us was probably the 5th biggest crowd for any committee hearing that he's seen. And he's been in the legislature for 9 terms, he said. And so that was pretty good turnout when you think of that. And we had some great testimony from supporters in the grassroots crowd. And we outnumbered our opponents by 50-1. There was one opponent who came to testify, and she's from out of state and testified in Montana as well, interestingly enough. So that was really good and great testimony from the Convention of State supporters around Wyoming.
Well, Julie, I just find it amazing every time I hear, which I have multiple times already this year, from legislators that they hear from more constituents about the Convention of States resolution than any other issue that is before them. And that is just so encouraging. And it was so inspiring to see how the grassroots really turned out for that committee hearing. Your team has worked so hard on this. You have really built the grassroots army. You have worked hard at building relationships with your legislators there. So can you tell our audience what's next for you in this process?
Well, next is the floor vote. So, but going backwards, on Wednesday, we had the committee hearing, and normally what happens after a committee hearing is the committee votes to see if they will pass it through committee. Well, for some reason, the chairman decided that that day wasn't the right day to vote on it. And so the vote was scheduled for Friday. Now, some of the other committee members were very, very disappointed in that. They thought it was unfair to have the vote, not to have the vote when all these supporters for the resolution were sitting there watching. and had come all this way. A lot of people drove, many hours to go to Cheyenne. There were many people from Cheyenne, but a lot drove hours to get there. And so, the other committee members thought that was pretty poor show. But at any rate, it was moved to Friday, and supporters turned up again. I think Brian, one of our district captains, said that there were about 25 supporters there this time, which was really good. We didn't have the numbers of people driving hours because we knew it was going to be a very short, quick debate and vote. But we did pass 3-2. And the next stage is the committee of the whole vote, which will happen sometime this week, later, we think, maybe early next week. It's actually on the schedule right now. But it's a lottery when it actually is going to happen. So we'll have to mobilize really fast once we find out when the vote's going to happen. So
and Julie, I love that you're bringing up the fact that how faithful the grassroots supporters are. They show up to hearings, they show up to town halls, they're always showing up in certain states, and that's really the driving force of this movement, is the supporters on the ground. For example, on the COS website, there was Rod Guile, who posted that there were over 100 COS supporters who showed up for a town hall, which was in like a really small town, which is absolutely amazing. And we are hearing reports from all across the country that there is a huge influx of support and interest for Convention of States. Has that been your experience where you are in Wyoming?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been absolutely amazing. The gentleman who put on that town hall, Vance, it was in a little tiny town, about 400 people, he said, and so it's like a quarter of the town turned up for that town hall. And the team over there, kind of spearheaded by Vance, actually has done 7 town halls in the last month. And there's, he's done 6. District captain in Cheyenne did 1. And there's 2 more scheduled, one for Rock Springs and one for Casper in the next week. And so they're just rocking it. They're having town halls all over the place. And there's a real hunger for a solution, because everybody is so not only upset with the federal government, but they're also upset with one of our U.S. Congress people. So, who I won't mention.
Julie, you mentioned that the Convention of States grassroots supporters really outnumbered opponents at this initial committee hearing 50-1. And in fact, if I recall correctly, there was a point at which the committee chair said something like, well, we've heard from a bunch of supporters. Now we want to hear from opponents. And there was just kind of silence. And I was texting with Dave, the regional director, and he was saying, yeah, there aren't any opponents here. And so they ended up having to dig through people on Zoom to find anyone who wanted to testify in opposition. It was just crazy good to see how the grassroots army for Convention of States really showed up in person, as you pointed out, and took the time to be there. That just speaks volumes. Now let's focus on the legislators for a minute, Julie. What is your message to the Wyoming legislators as far as why it's important for your state to join the movement to rein in an out of control federal government?
Well, what I would say is look at what the federal government's doing to Wyoming. And energy is a huge deal in Wyoming: coal, natural gas. And this administration is crippling that. And what I would say to legislators is, what are you going to do? What can you as a legislator do to rein in that power? And that power is being wielded. It's more like, vengeance and spite and vindictiveness. It's not anything about, reality and economic stability and that sort of thing. And you can't, some of the opposition talk about nullifying what the what the federal government's doing. You can't nullify executive orders, and you can't nullify $1.9 trillion stimulus packages, and you can't do anything like that is lasting. So you really have to have a convention of states. You have to propose some strong and structural amendments that can last for decades. And maybe we have multiple conventions of states throughout the decades to just kind of bring us back to common sense constitutional governance. So that's what I would say to them. And then from the perspective of how many people are supporting this, and 50-1 is an obvious. Obviously, Wyoming is supporting this overwhelmingly. If a member of the opposition can't even show up in person to testify, then clearly, the people who support outnumber the people who oppose. And so something I think it was Mark Meckler said, you have to ask yourself, am I a representative of the people of Wyoming, or am I a tyrant? So if there's that overwhelming support, you have to do, what your constituents say. And I've actually been hearing from legislators and from constituents saying that legislators have told them that, yeah, I think I'm going to have to vote for this just because of so much constituent input. So that's really says something.
Mm-hmm. And Julie, just listening to you in this interview, and in listening to you in previous interviews as well, it's clear to me that you have a heart for self-governance and that you have a heart for convention of states. Can you share with the audience a little bit of your story, how you found convention of states? Why did you decide to put your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor on the line and become a volunteer?
Well, kind of a funny backstory. So I was living in California, just not too far from where you live, as we just found out. And my husband and I retired to New Zealand because I grew up in New Zealand. Some of my family lives there. And so we thought we'll retire there. And we knew it was a bit sketchy from a lack of self-governance point of view, but we didn't know how bad it was over there. And we spent 3 years there and decided we couldn't handle the politics. You have to ask for permission for absolutely everything when you're there. So we made a spreadsheet and we put all the things that were important to us on the spreadsheet, and Hewlett, Wyoming won out. And we decided that once we retired, we were going to get more involved in things because we were just so disgusted with, the direction of the country, and how individuality was being extinguished and self-governance was being extinguished, and we just had to get involved. And I don't actually remember how I found out about convention of states. I think it might have been on the Glenn Beck show. And I thought, that's interesting. And I signed the petition, and I was like a lot of people, I just signed the petition and thought, well, I signed the petition and maybe something will happen. And Rod Geil, who you mentioned, kept poking me and, kept saying, you have to get more involved. You have to get more involved. And so eventually I did. And I started slowly, like a lot of people do. And then it just, the longer I was in convention of states and the more I heard and the more people who influenced me within convention of states, I just got much more passionate about it. And I just think it's the only thing that we can do to save our republic.
Well, we are a non-partisan organization, as you know, but there does seem to be an increased urgency in our movement in light of this new administration being on a path to increase the size of the federal government at a faster rate than ever before, and even to remake the court system. So I'm wondering, do you feel that sense of urgency, Julie, and are you concerned about the trajectory that America is on right now?
Well, absolutely. I look at where I came from America, but where I came from, where I grew up, was New Zealand. And I watch New Zealand, and that's the direction we're going. I mean, they're kind of going in our direction, and we're going in theirs at the same time. The prime minister there, after a horrible shooting a couple of years ago, just from one day to the next, made hundreds of thousands of New Zealand citizens criminals overnight, because she decided that, semi-automatic weapons had to be confiscated and or turned in or bought back, or whatever the euphemism is. And then just the other day, they've strengthened that, and they're now confiscating or making illegal more weapons. And it's not about the weapons necessarily. It's about the fact that a government from one day to the next can make you a criminal. And that's what I'm seeing in the US now. From one day to the next, anybody who supported the wrong candidate is suddenly a criminal. And before we know it, the definition of terrorist will probably change and used to target certain groups of people. And so it's not the way our government is supposed to work. We're not supposed to have a dictator who can just from one day to the next, sign an edict, and then all these people are criminals. And so, yeah, I think it's very urgent. And I'm surprised that more legislators don't understand the urgency. I get the impression, they're so concentrated on their state that, and for good reason, but they're not looking at what they're losing as a legislator in their state. And that's one of the things that I fear as well. Fear is probably the wrong word, but I'm concerned about the legislators not realizing that soon they will be insignificant if we continue down this path. They'll just become administrators for the federal government. So that's why I'm quite urgent about this, and this is what I'm trying to relay to people, that if you don't take a stand, then our state legislators won't work for us anymore.
It's a very good point. So our resolution covers three topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and reducing the jurisdiction of the federal government. In light of what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, is there a particular amendment that you like most?
Well, I'm pretty partial to the amendment that came out of the simulation and I'm going to paraphrase but the one that basically says if any ABC bureaucracy makes a rule, then Congress has to vote on it. And if they don't within a certain period of time, that rule is vacated and doesn't become, part of the law, because that does two things. It kind of handcuffs the bureaucracies a little bit, and then also puts the onus back on our Congress, who are supposed to be voting on these things, puts the onus back on them, and then we know where they stand on some of these items. Right now they have all this cover. They don't have to show where they stand on many things. They can say, oh, that was the EPA who did that, not us. And I love that amendment. So that's my favorite.
Accountability is so important for our elected officials. Julie, for our viewers in Wyoming who are watching right now, what can they do now to help Convention of States?
Well, I can sign the petition and volunteer. We've had so many new volunteers, just like all the other states are seeing a bunch of new volunteers, and they're really enthusiastic and active. And the other day, we said, please call your senators and let them know how important this is. I asked for volunteers from, amongst our ranks, and all these people put their hands up and said, yes, I'll call hundreds of people. And so, they're calling supporters, asking the supporters to call their senators. And it's just amazing, the energy. And like I say, with these town halls, brand new district captains are putting their hands up saying, yes, I'll have a town hall. I'll do a town hall. And it's really amazing. So I would ask people of Wyoming to sign the petition, get involved, join the team, the grassroots team, and you'll get inspired. You really will.
I love that. Well, congratulations in Wyoming. You're doing an amazing job there on the ground. Thank you for joining us on this program. You are welcome back anytime you'd like. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, we have our Article 5 trivia answer with Mike Ruthenberg. So Mike, back to you.
All right, I'm back. And I'm sure you are just noodling on what the trivia question was today. And there's tons of comments. There's lots of things going on what could possibly be another way to limit the federal government that we gave up back in 1913, if you remember, all the way back to the beginning of our show. Well, I'm super glad to be able to explain what happened here. And for those of you that don't remember, the Declaration of Independence, of course, was put out there for us to secure, or it was designed to, or the purpose of the Declaration of Independence was to secure certain unalienable rights that we have that are given to us by God. And the Constitution, of course, put checks and balances into the Constitution to protect these rights, one of which is to keep our freedom and our self-determination and not have an overbearing federal government. The question, there are two ways that the people in the Constitution were given to be able to secure their unalienable rights and to limit the size of the federal government. The first one being Article 5. As I said on this wonderful t-shirt that I'm going to give away, we can use the Constitution to save the Constitution. There we go. That's one of the ways, is Article 5. The second way, and here's the answer, it was actually repealed, changed the balance of power. Instead of letting our state legislatures appoint whoever is going to be in the Senate, it turned that into direct election. And that radically changed the power of balance, because it used to give the state legislatures a real direct line into controlling the power of the federal government. Because if not only could they imagine how wonderful it would be for the states to have that power to control their senators, and that gives us, we the people, a lot more control to put the pressure on our House of Representatives, who would then be the ones that would, or our state legislators, that are far easier for us to be able to control, for us to be able to boot out of office if they're not doing the right thing. And they're the ones that have this awesome responsibility. Well, again, that was repealed in the 17th Amendment. So that's the second way that the people were given power. And that's the answer to our trivia question for today. So hopefully you got it right. And if you didn't, hopefully you learned about how the 17th Amendment changed the balance of power in America. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Andrew and Rita, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I know the situation right now seems desperate. The bureaucrats and politicians in Washington are steamrolling our rights. A runaway federal government time in Washington, and we see an ever expanding federal government that wants to get more and more of its power into your lives. But amongst all of those things that I listed, there is a plan for you to reclaim your self-governance. And that plan doesn't rest with me. It doesn't rest with Rita, with Mark, or with anyone at Convention of States. It rests with you and with what the founders gave you. Because in Article 5 of the US Constitution is the power for we the people to take back our self-governance by calling the very first states that have passed the COS resolution. We need 34 states. That's the magic number. If we get to 34 states, we will trigger the very first Article 5 Convention of States. So join this movement. It is critical that you and all the supporters within Convention of States sign the petition to call this convention. So here's two things that I want you to do. Go to the COS website, www.conventionofstates.com. Stand on the sidelines, get in the trenches. Go into your community and be a leader for Convention of States and help us to change DC forever.
And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us on all those social media platforms: Rumble, MeWe, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, and Instagram. We're on all of them. Follow us there, please. And check out the Battle Cry with Convention of States President Mark Meckler. That's on Sunday nights at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time. You will be inspired by that. And we'll see you next Tuesday here at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time for another edition of COS Live. Right now, it's time for you and me to get back to work because we have a country to